Welcome, my name is Tiran and I will start by welcoming you to our presentation. Our group members are Kango, Wanki and Yafai. And today we will be presenting on Japan. I'll now hand over to our first speaker who will guide you through his slides.
Japanese business environment not founded isolation. It has been shaped to successful wins or globalizations. For Australia firms, understanding this history is not just academic. It is the key to understand both opportunity and risk today. Let's begin with the model originals. In 1853, the Commander Porter's Black Ship forced Japan to open its port, exploration and wet list of the Koyukacha opportunity, and learning to quickly change. In 1863, the Meiji Restorations certified power, abolished the feudal domains, and introduced the Western legal and manual system. The government pursued Fuko-Komping and Sokusong Koyo please invest into the railway, extend and shipbuilding. By 1983, the railway legally extended 1,200 kilos. Industry share for GDP rose almost 30%. The Japan exported skills and tea in exchange for the material trading the export for industry model. Now turning to the legal foundation, Japan developed a civil war living model onto containing Europe based on the 35 state and straight rule-based government. By constant, Australia inherited the common law system from the British with the predict and injured interpretations drive change. For the business, this matters Japan's system is stable and predictable, but the shoulder adoptions Australia's system was more flexible and principled. For the Australia firm entered Japan, it means a switch for the cash driving to the cold driving legal environment negotiation may be slow, but the participation will be stable with trust is built. After World War II, the United States occupation through sweeping reform. By 1947, the Constitution, land reform, labor right, and the dissemination of the independence to Malipurs. The Korean War in 1950 proved huge bodies. The U.S. Army ordered to made up over 60% explored time, and the Vietnam War in 1960 they further increased the demand in Japan's steel, ship, and chemistry. From 1988 to 1973, the Japan experienced economic micro-layers GDP growth nearly 10% annually, and exposed double and shift of the GDP from 10% to 20%. The 1964 Tokyo Olympic and launched the ceremony marathons the Japan to return to the global stage. In 1980, East Japan recharged its spec. Japanese car purchased more than 30% of the Australian market, with the Tokyo Carabano being the most biggest sellers. Sony and parent overseas US film in the electronics, but the piece that, according to the 1985 focus on the year to perish over 50% conscience export, achieved project surplus environment fortunately a real estate for a shock market model. The Tokyo land price hit history high. The billion hit burst in 1998. The growth slowed and in 1.6 years, so the current account shifted still hit US dollar 35 billions in 1999. By 2023, the Japan net to the foreign assets reaches the US dollar 4.7 trillion. The world lost market Japan's film calculation, long-term sustainable focus. In 21 centers, new challenge engagement. The Fukushima nuclear destroyed in 2011 called Japan's engagement shelf setting from 20% to up just 60% by 2050. Today, Australia, Japan larger than LEG supplied coal volume about 63% of the imports in 2029. Meanwhile, engaging currently the shift of the people over 65 rose to the 30% in 1999 to 30% in 1923. It's created huge silver economies with the elder cares market exposed the JYP chain business by 2022. The labor shortage have pursued later in retirement of the high female participation and automation. Japan is now the world leader in the robot distance, 61 robots per 1 billion workers in 2021. Japan's trade policy today has a dual character. On the opening side, it accepts the CPTPP in 1980 and RCEP in 2022, cut traffic and harmonized the rules from the original. On the restricting side, in 2020, economic security program has increased the security on foreign information in the same microdosing engagement portal and the data. So Japan liberalized the trade border, but territorially protect the strategies industry. To conclusion, today is a policy stable, legally transposed, but strictly combined. It has the maturing market with a limited consumer growth, but raised demand is emerging healthcare. For Australia, the complementary so clearly resource and engineering influence Japan, while Japan promote technique and sustainable, but a successful require adoption to Japan's long-term low-risk corporate culture. As the Nobel Prize Carl Huda Harukami said, the beauty of the Japan is the tranquility and safety. Japan's business culture is not the same to restructure on the surface, but once trust is built, the partnership has deeply and enduring.
I'll be speaking about Japan's economic performance, human development, infrastructure, research and innovation, and its key industries and exports. The aim is to give Australian firms a clear picture of Japan's strengths, potential risks, and long-term opportunities for investment and expansion. Japan remains the world's third largest economy, but its GDP per capita has shown a slight decline in recent years. In 2020-22, it stood at about 34,066, which fell to 33,836 in 2023, and further to 32,476 in 2024. Projections suggest that it will be stabilized at around 33,956 in 2025. This downward trend reflects both slow economic growth and demographic challenges such as an aging and shrinking population. For Australian firms, the key takeaway is that while Japan is still a large and advanced economy, its growth trajectory signals structural challenges and business must keep in mind when planning entry strategies. Looking at human development, Japan consistently ranks among the top countries globally, with HDI scores ranging from 0.920 to 0.925 over the past 3 years. These high scores reflect Japan's world-leading life expectancy, highly developed education system, and strong living standards. When comparing HDI with GDP per capita, HDI provides more complete picture of development since it accounts for health and education alongside income. For Australian firms, this means that Japan offers not only a wealthy consumer market but also a highly educated and wealthy workforce, which is crucial for long-term business sustainability and stability. Japan's infrastructure is world-class, spanning airports, seaports, high-speed rail, expressways, hospitals, and universities. Every year, Japanese airports serve over 100 million passengers. Ports handle hundreds of millions of tons of cargo, and the Shinkans cover nearly 3,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. The expressway system exceeds 10,000 kilometers, while healthcare capacity includes over 8,000 hospitals with 1.56 million beds. Japan also hosts more than 800 universities and 27 national research institutions, supporting almost 3 million students. In the World Bank Logistic Performance Index, Japan ranks 13th globally with a strong infrastructure score of 4.2 out of 5. For Australian businesses, this means reliable logistics and supply chain support for international operations. Japan invests heavily in research and development, spending around 3.7% of its GDP in 2023, its highest level yet. This investment has helped the country achieve strong positions on global rankings, including 13th on the Global Innovation Index and 12th on the Network Readiness Index. Japan's domestic saving rate is also high, at about 24.7% of GDP, and its financial sector is deep, with credit to the private sector equaling nearly 197% of GDP. However, foreign direct investment inflows fell to $17.1 billion in 2024, a decline from the previous year. For Australian firms, this means Japan offers a robust innovation ecosystem and strong financial foundations through attracting foreign investors remains an area with room for improvement. Japan's economy is dominated by the service sector, which makes up around 71.4% of GDP. Industry and manufacturing follow about 26.9%, with agriculture, forestry, and fishing contributing less than 1%. In terms of export, Japan remains a powerhouse. In 2024, vehicle and transport equipment export total roughly $151 billion. Machinery added $126 billion, and electrical goods and chemicals made up another significant share. Food, agriculture, and fisheries exports also hit a record 1.5 trillion yen, despite challenges such as trade bans. Although Japan's total export reached about $707 billion in 2024. For Australian businesses, these figures highlight Japan's strength in advanced manufacturing and innovation. alongside growing opportunities in high quality food and agriculture exports. That concludes my section. I'll now hand over to the next presenter who will take you through their slides.
Okay, on how culture shapes corporate scandals and governance, there are two cases. The Olympus accounting scandal in Japan clearly showed how high power distance, collectivism, high uncertainty avoidance, and high contact communication played out inside the organization. In 2011, British CEO Michael Woodford was fired just 2 weeks into the job. Why? Because he started asking questions about suspicious payments from past acquisitions. He'd brought in PwC to investigate, and they found that in the 2008 Girls deal, Olympus had paid a success fee of $687 million, about 31% of deal's value, way above the usual 1 to 2%. The money went to two tiny consulting firms, which raised serious red flags. Later, Olympus admitted they'd been hiding investment losses since the 1990s. The fallout was huge. Their stock crashed, down 18% one day, 22% the next, and more than 70% of their market value disappeared. The board was referred, and the prosecutors in Japan, the UK, and the US got involved. So how does this tie back to culture? First, high power distance made questioning authority seem disruptive. Woodford said he was the only one speaking in the room, and he was quickly pushed out. Internal accountability just didn't happen until outsiders stepped in. Second, collectivism and restraint made employees stay silent to keep the peace, even when they knew something was off. No one spoke up until the crisis broke out publicly. Third, high uncertainty avoidance meant Olympus used complex financial tricks, like Tobashi, to hide the risk instead of facing it. That just delayed the disaster and made it worse. And in high context culture, important info tends to stay hidden in relationships and unspoken understandings. It wasn't until PwC turned vegan hints into clear documents, and the media brought it into the open, that people really understood what was going on. None of this is about right or wrong. It just shows how culture and systems shape the way problems are noticed and dealt with. Now let's look at Australia. The Australian Banking Royal Commission showed the opposite. A fast response thanks to low power distance, high individualism, lower uncertainty avoidance, low context communication, and an indulgent culture. The government appointed Kenneth Hayne to lead the investigation. They held public hearings that were broadcast across the country. On February 1st, 2019, they released a 496-page report with 76 recommendations. Just 3 days later, it was shared with Parliament and the public, and the real reforms followed. Here's how the culture played out. Low power distance meant regular people could speak directly to power. Farmers and the frontline staff testified against top bank executives. One farmer lost $4.58 million in 2 years from a misleading law. Another said he got a default notice just weeks after his partner had a heart attack. These stories made a real impact. High individualism meant personal testimonies quickly turned into public pressure. One huge issue was fee for no service. Some banks even charged bad customers for 10 years. The media ran with it. Even in 2024, ANZ was still being held accountable and ordered to pay $3.3 million. That's the strength of a lower context system: clear records, public oversight, and traceability. Lower uncertainty avoidance may have a lot more risk-taking, especially in finance, but the system has solid tools to deal with it: public hearings, documents, specific recommendations, and deadlines. And because of the indulgent culture, the media and public really got involved. Outlets like ABC and SMH kept the spotlight on the issue, turning scattered complaints into major political and regulatory pressure. So no, Australia isn't necessarily more moral, but its culture and institutions made it easier to expose and fix problems quickly. Compare the two cases and you will see the culture distance. Both Japan and Australia ended up using modern governance tools, transparency, third-party investigations, and regulatory reforms. But how they got there was totally different. In Japan, high power distance, collectivism, high uncertainty avoidance, and high context communication caused the risk to be internalized and delayed until it exploded. Think about it. Woodford fired in 2 weeks. 687 million in fees, 1.5 to 1.7 billion in hidden losses, and a stock price collapse. Australia, on the other hand, with low power distance, individualism, low uncertainty avoidance, low context communication, and indulgence, brought issues to light early. Testimonials led to 76 institutional reforms, and accountability continued years later. Beyond Hofstede's 6 dimensions, these cultural differences can also be reinforced by Ronian and Schenker's culture clusters. According to this framework, Japan is classified within the Far Eastern cluster, characterized by hierarchy, collectivism, and the pursuit of harmony. While Australia belongs to the Anglo cluster, marked by individualism, low power distance, and contractual transparency. The structural contrast between those two clusters provides a deeper explanation for why seemingly similar corporate scandals unfolded along very different trajectories. By contrast, during Australia's Banking Royal Commission, the Anglo cluster logic of individualism and transparent contracts enabled farmers and consumers to testify publicly, supported by media scrutiny, ultimately driving 76 institutional reforms. Thus, where both countries converged at the outcome level toward disclosure and regulatory restructuring, the processes revealed profound cultural distance and interplay where Hofstede's dimensions and Ronian and Schenker's cluster mutually reinforce each other. For instance, in the Olympics case, Japan's Far Eastern cluster culture encouraged preserving stability and harmony within the organization. Employees remained silent even in the face of a 687 million US dollars advisory fee anomaly and decades of concealed losses, until external auditors and international regulators intervened.
Well, according to Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, every country should focus on industries where it has the lowest opportunity cost and trade for goods where its cost is much higher. Japan is a clear example of this logic. Historically, Japan has never had a strong advantage in agriculture or energy. In the 1960s, Japan's food self-sufficiency rate was over 70%, but by 2023, it had fallen to around 38%. In energy, after the 2011 Fukushima disaster, most nuclear plants were shut down, and by 2014, Japan's energy self-sufficiency dropped to just 6.3%, which is one of the lowest among OECD countries. These numbers show that Japan's opportunity cost in food and energy is extremely high. So, what does Japan do? It signs free trade agreements to secure these imports. For example, under the 2015 Japan-Australia Economic Partnership Agreement, Japan agreed to gradually cut tariffs on Australian beef from 38.5% down to 90.5%. This meant huge opportunities to sell more beef to Japan. For Japan, it meant accepting its weakness in agriculture while freeing resources for cars and electronics. By joining CPTPP and CEP, Japan gained cheaper access to food, energy, and raw materials, while protecting the stability of its manufacturing supply chain. Exactly how comparative advantage works in practice. Japan trades industrial goods for food and energy, so it can remain global competitive in manufacturing. But comparative advantage is not the full story. Krugman's new trade theory and the idea of strategic trade policy explain that, in some industries, economies of scale and learning effects are so strong that government intervention can give domestic firms a big edge in global competition. Japan's industrial policies fit this logic perfectly, such as semiconductors. The Japanese government is heavily subsidizing both foreign and domestic firms to rebuild its chip supply chain. TSMC's Kumamoto plant received up to 476 billion yen in subsidies for Phase 1, and another large package of support for Phase 2 in 2024. The domestic company Rapidus launched a 2-nanometer project in Hokkaido, backed by around $3.9 billion in government funding in 2024. Subsidies help companies cover the massive early costs of R&D and factories, and they also create clusters that drive long-term competitiveness. The same logic applies to green energy. Under this green transformation strategy, Japan has promised 15-year subsidies for hydrogen and ammonia fuels to close the cost gap with fossil fuels. It has also issued GX bonds to fund the transition and is building a national carbon market. The goal is clear. Japan wants to position itself as a leader in the next generation of clean energy. This is textbook strategic trade policy. When industries has higher fixed costs, economics of scale, and strong spillover effects, the government steps in with subsidies and regulations to help domestic firms capture the winner-takes-all advantage. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you.